thank you for joining us for this Wednesday evening service of First Baptist Church in Lucedale, Mississippi. I want to remind you about our schedule. We're having worship services on Sunday at 8:30 on Sunday morning. We have Sunday school at 9:45. We have a second worship service at 11 o'clock. Right now, we're still having worship in our fellowship hall. Also, our Sunday night services have started back. This Sunday night, Mary Walker is going to be sharing her testimony in our 6 o'clock evening worship. We invite you to be a part of Sunday Night Live. We're having some very special Sunday night services. I want to read you a passage of Scripture from John chapter 13. It's a lengthy passage, so follow along as I read. From John 13, 1 through 17, and the title of my message tonight is this: In the upper room there was no servant. Beginning to read in verse 1. Now before the feast of Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil, having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he had come to the Father and was going back to God, got up from supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, Never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one which was betraying him. For this reason he said, Not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then I, your Lord and teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I wish I could take you back to the little town where I was born. I grew up in a little cotton mill town, the little cotton mill town of Stonewall, Mississippi. At the time I was growing up, we had about 1,200 people in town, and the vast majority of those people, or someone in their family, all worked in the cotton mill. For a long time, we had only one paved road, and that was the state highway that ran right through the middle of town. In the particular part of town that I lived in, which was right across from the schoolhouse, there were 19 homes on our block, most all of them filled with children. On that block, there were 3 streets. There was a front street, and there was a row of houses on the front, and then there was a middle street, and there was a row of houses on one side of the street and a row of houses on the other side of the street. They faced each other, and then on the back street, there was another row of houses facing the different way. And in the cotton mill, you were assigned where you could live. You lived where they told you you could live. My mother was a school teacher. I suppose that's why we lived on the front street. And on the streets going back were other people. But the poorest family that I knew anything about was the Kennedy family who lived on the back street. There were about 4 children in that family, maybe 5, and the dad worked in the cotton mill and didn't make a whole lot of money, and so they struggled just to make it through the week. They didn't have a lot, but one of the things that the family did have was a lot of love. Fred was the Kennedy's oldest son. He and I played together and fished together and sometimes fought together, but Fred's play was interrupted every day by the mill whistle. The whistle blew at the end of each shift and at the beginning of the next. So every morning at 7 o'clock, the mill whistle blew. Every morning, every afternoon at 3 o'clock, the whistle blew. And then every night at 11 o'clock, that same whistle blew. So at 3 o'clock every day, that was the end of his dad's shift. And Fred would leave play from wherever he was and begin to head home, as would every other child in that family. And so they went home to greet their dad. And I've been there. It was the oddest thing. All those children would come in, they would kiss their dad, and then they would argue over who was going to have the privilege of taking off his shoes. Now, as a boy, that sounded a little silly to me then, but those children cherished the chance to remove their daddy's shoes. To them, it was an honor. Now me, I had no desire to meet that man at 3 o'clock. I certainly had no desire to take off his shoes, but then I was not his son, and he was not my father. The service those children rendered their father was a service that grew out of a relationship of love. Now, with that story in mind, I want to take you back to the upper room, to those verses that we read earlier, where Jesus and his disciples met for a final meal together. Jesus, as you know, sent 2 disciples ahead of the rest to make preparations for the gathering. The table was all spread when they arrived. The food was prepared, and as customary, there was a bowl, a pitcher of water, and a towel, all there for the usual washing of feet. However, there was one thing missing in that room. They took their places around the table. They eyed the food and they waited. They looked around the room. Everything was prepared. The food was before them. But in the upper room, there was no servant. Oh no, they needed no one to serve their food. They could see to that themselves. The servant's place was not at the table, but with the bowl, the pitcher, and the towel. Those things sat alone in the corner of a room. The presence of those items brought a strange silence around that table. The bowl, the pitcher, and the towel sat screaming for their attention. Their presence that night would serve to bring to light that in the upper room there was no servant. That, number one, was evident from the neglected ministry of the disciples. As you might know, foot washing was the task of a slave in those days. When John the Baptist wanted to convey how unworthy he was in comparison to Jesus, he said, "There is one coming after me, and I am not worthy to unbuckle his sandal." And the picture there was of unbuckling one's sandals in preparation of being the servant and washing the feet. So the disciples, as they sat around the table, were faced with an opportunity for ministry. A bowl, a pitcher, and a towel sat there as a strong witness to their neglect. Let's face it, feet aren't very attractive today. I take my mom sometimes to the foot doctor, and I think about him and I think, I don't think I would want to be a foot doctor and be looking at somebody's feet every day. Well, that's what the servant did in the days of Jesus, not the doctor, and he often wasn't rewarded well for it. I have a feeling that feet were less attractive then. In 1981, I visited Ecuador and I saw the Ecuadorian Indians in the mountains as they walked up those mountain trails. And some of the people I saw, I would look at their big toe and it would be frayed like a worn out tennis shoe. I've been in the dusty streets of Romania and I've seen the dusty, dirty feet of gypsies and gypsy children. Washing someone's feet is not the most desirable task. So there they all were, sitting around the table, waiting for one of their fellows to rise, or rather humble himself to the occasion, and not one of them wanted this unwelcome task. In my home, my wife and I have always operated as partners. We are partners in finance. As you know, I make the money and she spends it. You know I'm kidding, of course. We are partners in household duties. When we had children, we were partners in parenting. And when our children were younger, still in their diaper days, we were also partners in that sometimes not so wonderful task. In diapering or undiapering, there occasionally arises, as you know, an unpleasant situation. Nobody has to tell you the problem is there. It sort of speaks for itself. And there have been times when, although we were partners, we found ourselves ready to neglect our part of that partnership. You parents will follow me. Both parents are sitting on the floor playing with this sweet little bundle of joy when things suddenly grow sour. Now, both of you know it. Both of you know what needs to be done and has to be done. You don't mention it, you just ignore the problem, hoping the other partner will do what you really don't want to do yourself. I imagine it was much the same that night and around that table in the upper room. Each one of the disciples knew what needed to be done, but not one of them scrambled for the opportunity to perform this less than noble task. In the upper room, there was no servant evident from the neglected ministry of the disciples. Like the bowl, the pitcher, and the towel, like the soiled diaper, there are ministries all around us that are screaming for our attention, but there aren't many of us who are trying to be the first in line for an opportunity to be the servant. So in the upper room, there was no servant. I wonder if there are any servants listening tonight. In the upper room, there was no servant, but there was, number two, a scoundrel. Judas was there. Do you think that he was going to stoop so low as to wash someone's feet? This ministry opportunity was there before them, but Judas was not a ministry-minded disciple. Judas was a money-minded disciple. And even then, Satan had put it into his mind to betray Jesus. As he rolled those potential profits around in his mind, a bowl, a pitcher, and a towel sat screaming for his attention. You see, Judas never learned that the profits of ministry are not material. He was in the ministry for the money, but ministry is not a financially profitable proposition. It is a give all, leave all, lose all affair. In the church, there are few servants serving Christ because serving Christ is unprofitable and unpopular. So in the upper room, there was no servant, but there was a scoundrel. And number three, there were some success-oriented individuals, notably James and John. But really, they had all disputed at one time or another about which one of them was the greatest. But you remember the time that James and John's mother came and sought that they might sit on the right and left hand of Jesus in his kingdom. You see, John and James were up-and-coming televangelists at that point, ready to don their three-piece suits with their million-dollar smiles, with all the success and the acclaim that went along with the package. They thought they could be first and second vice president of Jesus Incorporated. But that was not the opportunity that was before them. Instead, there was a bowl, a pitcher, and a towel screaming for their attention, but they turned their nose up at that opportunity for ministry because it was beneath their dignity. You might remember that Jesus once told a story about some men who were too good to help. A man traveling between Jerusalem and Jericho had encountered some thieves who nearly beat him to death. They'd stolen his clothes. A priest passed by and saw him, but didn't want to get involved. A Levite also passed by and saw the man, but both of them left the other man in his need. Here lay this man, this ministry opportunity, screaming for their attention, but it was beneath their dignity. And then as Jesus tells the story, he tells about another man, a Samaritan, a hated Samaritan. He saw the wounded man and bound his wounds and put him on his own beast and took him to an inn and paid for his care until he was well. Now, honestly, there are ministries in our community and in our church that are screaming for our attention. But sometimes I find that people turn their nose up at those opportunities. We are too good to help. It's beneath our dignity to share the love of Jesus in a low-income housing project. Oh no, not those feet. Or beneath our dignity to teach a Sunday school class to a little handful of boys and girls. That's not a ministry for a success-oriented individual seeking prestige and popularity and the praise of men. But it is a ministry that brings praise with God. So in the upper room, there was no servant, evident from the neglected ministry of the disciples. But there was a scoundrel, and there were some success-oriented individuals, and then there was Simon. When Simon Peter pondered who this was who stooped before him to wash his feet, he pulled away. Not my feet. Not you. You, Jesus, are too good for that. You are a king, not a slave. But Jesus was setting an example that Peter was obviously not ready to follow. One day, many years ago, I was passing out some flyers about a backyard Bible club in a low-income housing project. As I was walking by the dumpster in the parking lot of that complex, a man stopped me and asked me what I was doing there. I told him that we were going to have a Bible school there. And the smell as we stood by the dumpsters was horrific, and the flies swarmed all around us. And he remarked, if Jesus were here, he wouldn't be out here among these flies. Did he think Jesus was too good to put himself in that situation? Yes. He thought that Jesus was too good to be in that situation because that's what he thought about himself. He thought he was too good to stand out there among those flies and be a servant to Jesus. What about you? Are there places that you are too good to go? Are there things that you're too good to do? Once, as I mopped up a spill in the basement of a previous church, I had a lady walk up to me and say, "A mop has never fit my hand. That's a job for a servant." And she meant that, and I knew she meant it. A mop didn't fit her hand because the love of Jesus didn't fit her heart. Thus it was with the disciples in the upper room. As the bowl and the pitcher and the towel sat screaming for their attention, they just looked the other way. Some people have the spiritual gift of sitting at a table waiting for somebody to bring them a glass of tea. Other people have the spiritual gift of seeing that people are served. Even selfish people who sit back and expect others to serve but are unwilling to serve themselves. What would you have done had you been in the upper room? Don't be too quick to respond. Here's why. Look around at all the things that need to be done around you. Look at the menial tasks, the hard, hidden tasks that often don't fit the hands or the hearts of privileged people like yourself. And then remember what Jesus said, "Inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me." First Baptist Church needs some servants. We need some people who are willing to wash the feet of Jesus by sitting in a room full of children and teaching them about Jesus. Let me tell you about Don and Louise Cook. Don and Louise Cook were members of First Baptist Church in Hamilton, Alabama. They were in their 80s, and they had been members of First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana, that had one of the largest Sunday school, or perhaps the largest Sunday school in the world, and one of the most massive bus ministries on the planet. And they had worked in that bus ministry and gone out and tried to reach families and children. We didn't have a bus ministry at our church, at First Baptist Church Hamilton, but Don and Louise went out every Saturday and knocked on the doors of homes where there were children who didn't come to church. And they talked with their families who were sometimes too lazy, too sorry to get up and get their children ready for church. And Don and Louise said, we will be there on Sunday morning. We will help you get your kids out the door. We will pick them up, bring them to church, sit with them in church, bring them back home, and often they would feed them on their way back home. They were washing the feet of Jesus. Nobody else wanted to be a part of that obvious task, but they took it on themselves to express the love of Jesus by that simple act of service. I want to ask you, what are you doing to express your love to Jesus? What service or ministry, like the bowl and the pitcher and the towel, scream for your attention? It is my prayer that the Lord would show you what He's calling you to do. Whatever it is, even if it's washing feet, I pray that you would be willing to do it. I remind you of the Kennedy children that I grew up with. I certainly had no passion to wash Mr. Kennedy's feet. But then I was not his son, and he was not my father. If you have no passion to wash the feet of Jesus by serving Him in some menial task, perhaps more is missing than just the desire. The service those children rendered their father was a service that grew out of a relationship of love. When the woman washed the feet of Jesus and wiped them with her hair, Jesus observed, "He who is forgiven little loveth little, but he who has been forgiven much loveth much." What about your love for Jesus? Let the bowl and the pitcher and the towel standing in the corner of your life answer that question for you. Thank you so much for listening.